Okay, hi everybody. So welcome to day 7. As we near the day of, we are at the fair and a lot of exciting things are going to happen. I would say for this reading in particular, Babbitt does an amazing job with describing the items that are in a fair, and the emotions run high between Egan and Ada. If you will notice, I'm sitting by a partially open window. And so today, April 13th, 2020, we also have a blustery day outside. In fact, I think it's almost like a hurricane or a tornado. I have no idea. But I wanted you to also be aware of darkened skies. But it's not August, it's April. And so we will commence. I begin on page 57, everybody. So let's see what happens now. Into the center of it all that afternoon came Egan, dazzled and breathless with the glories of his first fair. He clutched in his pocket a handful of coins saved for months toward this very moment, and he beamed without knowing he was beaming. At his side, Ada, veteran of many fairs, did her best to appear bored and critical, pointing out this feature and that, and comparing each to its predecessors of other years. That's a very fancy sentence simply to say she was a bit of a know-it-all, and she was very excited to be able to show him around and how much she had already experienced at this fair. But she was flushed with excitement and the pleasure of having a friend to whom she could show off the fair, and very proud of her new blue dress and the blue ribbon on the end of her pigtail. Behind them strolled Annabelle, pointedly ignoring the coarse carouse of other dogs. She threaded primly through forests of legs, her nose quivering. The scents were delicious. She sniffed them expertly, sorted out that of a nearby sausage booth, and turned toward it hopefully. Years of experience had taught her that children were careless. They dropped things, often things to eat. The smell of the sausage glazed her eyes with greed. Yes, it was going to be a splendid day. And so, Natalie Babbitt does just an amazing job in describing things in a way, we could say it's so much simpler, simply to say, Annabelle was there, she's gonna sniff her sausage, and she's gonna have a great time at the fair. But Babbitt doesn't do that. She stretches out this wonderful, glorious description. So she makes you feel it and smell it and become one with it. And if you don't understand a sentence, what will happen often is the next sentence, she sort of gets to the point. So enjoy the rich language and be patient, because the information will be revealed to you in a simpler way sooner or later. Okay, moving on. Again, page break, so you know our setting is going to shift a little bit. Egan walked with Ada once around the ring of booths, inspecting everything carefully. He was going to buy, but he refused to be hurried. He barely nodded to his father's friend, the chandler who had driven him to Instep, for he had no interest in anything so dull as candles. At last he stopped before a booth where beaded necklaces and bracelets spilled in gaudy heaps over a tangle of bright silk scarves and ribbons. You just imagine what that looks like. He was charmed, caught. He stepped forward, clinking the coins in his pocket. "What are you going to do?" said Ada. She was impatient to move on to the enchanting little proscenium of red and yellow stripes where a puppet show was stirring a crowd of children to squeals of laughter. "I'm going to buy a present," said Egan. "A present for my mother." "That's right. What a dear good lad," cooed the woman who was tending to the booth. "Do you mean you're going to buy your mother a dumb old bracelet or one of those awful scarves?" asked Ada. "That's a waste of money." The woman inside the booth scowled at Ada and turned to Egan persuasively, holding up a necklace of shiny red beads. "Look here, darling," she said. "Isn't this just beautiful? Your mother will love it. And here's a bracelet to match." She dropped the beads into his hand. They felt cool and made a most agreeable clicking sound. "I'll buy them," he croaked, helpless but pleased. And then, on an impulse, "I'll buy that too," and pointed to a square of blue silk that had a little cat painted carefully on one corner. He took it from the woman and handed it to Ada. "That's for you," he said. "Well," said Ada, mollified, "thank you very much. It's just beautiful." She tied the scarf around her neck at once, but as they left the booth, she turned and made a face at the woman anyway, just for good measure. So there's an opportunity to think about this. Here's Ada, who's sort of teased Egan and not been very kind and a bit show-offy, and even with her cat sweetheart scratching him. But he turns the other cheek and he buys her a scarf. Think about that. Would you have done that, or would you not have? Something to consider. They watched the puppet show twice through, drank brimming cups of cider, bought apples, and went around again munching. There were games to play: toss the hoop over the peg, throw the beanbag through the hole, guess how many pebbles in the jar. For these games and all the others, there were shiny prizes, which nobody ever won, which in fact nobody ever expected to win. The prizes were too grand, and the game operators too haughty, and the games themselves, after all, too difficult. How could you possibly be expected to toss the hoop over the peg when the game operator stared at you so, jingling the money in his apron pocket in that superior way, when the others waiting their turn were so impatient? And anyway, the hoop was very small and the peg was very far away. After each game, there was a moment when you felt clumsy and resentful. But there was always another booth, another game, another lift of hope. And so it went round and round all afternoon. I bet most of you can relate to that, standing somewhere, maybe on a boardwalk, and playing one of those games. But even if you lose, it's still fun to just toss something and see how close you can get. And for some of you out there, you probably did win. You might have had a really great shot. And so Egan is experiencing all of these emotions. And again, like any other fair or boardwalk activity, there's always another try somewhere else. But buying presents was the best of all. Egan chose a pipe for Uncle Anson with Instep Fair painted around its bowl in curling letters. He bought a pretty packet of needles for Aunt Gertrude, and for his father, a large polished wishbone. Pride, no doubt, from the roasted breast of some hapless goose. Fastened to the wishbone was a small card which advised, "It's best to be safe." "What do you want that for?" asked Ada. "There isn't any megamum where you live." "That's all right," said Egan. "It's a souvenir." "They shouldn't sell things like that just for souvenirs," frowned Ada. "They ought to take it more seriously." "I don't see why," said Egan. "Come on, let's go sit down somewhere. My money's all gone and my legs are tired." And all the time the clouds were coming, those hoped for guests of honor crowding against each other, till at last the sun was lost and the sky hung low and gray. The square had begun to empty now, for it was nearing supper time. The visitors were strolling off to their carts and caravans, calling to each other of tents and campfires, and the villagers were closing up their shops. A breeze bustling across the square set the flags and banners to flapping, and the sky darkened. "It's going to be a big one," somebody cried. A group of visitors hurried past the patch of grass where Egan and Ada had dropped, and their faces were tense with excitement. It appeared that the feature of the day was about to begin, and this, after all, was what they had really come for. A storm was on the way, and they would hear the megamum. It would wake on its cliff top, and they would hear it moan. "There, listen, wasn't that thunder?" "No, not yet. Come on, let's find a place to wait out of the weather." The sausage man was nailing boards across the open front of his booth, and on the other side of the square, Egan and Ada, immobilized by cider and fatigue, sat watching him as the rising wind bellowed his apron, and bits of paper twirled across the grass. I love that belled his apron. So the wind's coming and his apron probably stuck out a little bit like a bell. I mean, she's just so marvelous in the way she describes so many little details that creates such a mood. All right. Then they heard him shout, "Get out of there, blast you, come away from that meat." He vanished behind his booth, waving his arms, and Annabelle appeared on the other side, chewing hurriedly. "Annabelle," called Egan. "Here, Annabelle." The old dog started across the square toward them, and then she paused. A low rumble of thunder filled the sky, and the clouds seemed to tremble. Annabelle broke into a run, her fat body bouncing over the grass. In a moment, she reached them and crouched against Egan's side, her eyes glassy. "That dog certainly is a sissy," said Ada crossly. The fair was over and her new blue dress was dusty and wrinkled. She frowned at Egan, who sat sorting over the presents he had bought. "Let me see that old wishbone," she said, and snatched it from him. "Annabelle is not a sissy," said Egan, frowning back. "What's the matter with you? She can't help it if she doesn't like storms. Anyway, we better go home. It's going to rain. Give me back that wishbone." "It's not going to rain for hours yet," cried Ada, angry that the day was ending. "What's the matter with you? I'll bet you're afraid too. Sissy, sissy, here's your stupid wishbone." She dropped it into his lap, sprang up, and began to dance around him. Remember, he was seated, she was seated. She got up, started to call him names, basically. "Here's your stupid wishbone." She dropped it into his lap, sprang up, and began to dance around him. The wind tossed her skirt about her knees and her pigtail bounds. "Sissy, sissy, sissy," she sang. Egan's face grew hot. "I am not a sissy," he shouted. Thunder rolled a little nearer, and Annabelle pressed against his legs, panting. Ada stopped dancing suddenly and bent over him. "If you're not a sissy, prove it," she said, her nose close to his. "What do you mean?" asked Egan. "You know," whispered Ada. "You know. Climb it, Egan. Climb up, Kneeknock rise." Egan stared at her. "There, you see," she cried. "You are afraid." "Egan's afraid, Egan's afraid." She began to dance around him again. Egan got slowly to his feet. Why not go? He wanted to. He had wanted to all along. He thought again of what it might mean to slay the Megamon, to bring its head down on a stick. Excitement washed over him, and he trembled. So, at this point, I would ask you, do you think he should climb the rise, or should he not? What's your reason for thinking in that particular way? It's a dare, right? Okay, let's find out what happens. "I'll show you," he shouted. "I'll show you I'm not afraid, or Annabelle either. We'll climb it together, both of us. You'll see." And he turned toward the cliff. Ada stopped her dance abruptly. Her face, as she peered at him in the dim light, was suddenly very pale. "No, Egan, I didn't mean it." She tugged at his jacket. "Don't go, don't go." But Egan pulled away, suddenly possessed by the dream he had had, lost in it, part of it. He was running away toward the cliff, fearless and wild, and the old dog ran after him. There's a picture of her calling him names, basically. You can see how his expression is. Okay? One little part, we're going to stop there. We're on page 69 now. "You're a big dumb fool," screamed Ada into the wind. "The Megamon will eat you just like it ate Uncle Aunt." She began to cry, and then she was running too, running away toward home, just as the rain began. So, I mean, there's a lot to think about here. Do you think maybe Ada was frightened that he was climbing the rise, just as she had, challenged him to? She had some regrets, and what's Egan gonna find out there when he does, if he makes it up the rise? So stay tuned for day 8. All right, kids, don't forget, send a picture. I'll include a little Gmail address where you can send your pictures, hand-drawn, of any of the scenes that we have read from day 1 through day 7. It's a very rich kind of story here, and I would love all of you to enjoy. So maybe I can bring this camera a little closer and point it up to our sky here and see what you think of the gray. Okay, so let's see if we can get a really close look way up there. It's a gray day, very much like our story. All right, kids, enjoy.